We are going to begin tonight with a potential break in one of the greatest mysteries in all of American history. I'm talking about the hunt for the true identity of D.B. Cooper.
On a cold November evening in 1971, a man in a suit walked onto a plane and pulled off the most legendary unsolved crime in American history. They called him D.B. Cooper, or at least that's the name we ran with. 50 years later, the mystery still refuses to die. And now, thanks to pilot-turned-detective Dan Gryder, a new twist just might change everything you thought you knew. The day of the hijacking. It was November 24th, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve. While most Americans were thinking about turkey and pumpkin pie, one man in a black suit, skinny tie, and dark sunglasses was about to make history. He wasn't famous, he wasn't wealthy, and as far as anyone knew, he wasn't dangerous. He looked like the kind of guy you'd pass in an airport and forget 5 seconds later. But that night, he'd become the stuff of legend. He bought a ticket at Portland International Airport, cash, one way, for Northwest Orient Airlines, Flight 305 bound for Seattle. The ticket clerk barely noticed him. Back then, air travel was casual. No TSA lines, no body scanners, no plastic baggies for your liquids. People could stroll onto a plane with a smile and a boarding pass. And that's exactly what this man did. His ticket said Dan Cooper. Once on board, he picked a seat near the back, 18C. He ordered a bourbon and soda, lit a cigarette, yes, you could do that back then, and blended in like a business traveler winding down. The flight attendants remembered him as calm, polite, even a little charming. Nothing about him screamed criminal mastermind, but tucked in his briefcase was something that would change aviation forever. Not long after takeoff, he slipped a note to one of the flight attendants, Florence Schaffner. At first, she thought he was just another guy hitting on her. She slid the note into her pocket without reading it. That's when Cooper leaned in and whispered, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Her world flipped upside down. Inside the note, written in neat all-caps letters, was his demand: $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck ready in Seattle to refill the plane for his getaway. Oh, and no funny business or else. To prove he wasn't bluffing, he cracked open the briefcase just enough to show her wires, red sticks, and what looked like dynamite. What happened next played out like a movie script. The pilots notified air traffic control, the airline scrambled to meet his demands, and the passengers? They had no idea they were in the middle of a hijacking. Cooper made sure of it. He told the crew to stay calm, keep everyone comfortable, and act normal. Imagine being on that flight, thinking you're just 30 minutes away from Seattle, maybe planning your holiday meal, while right behind you, a man is planning one of the boldest escapes in history. By the time the plane landed in Seattle, Cooper's plan was in motion. Authorities delivered the money and parachutes on the tarmac, and in exchange, the passengers were quietly released. Not one of them had a clue what had really gone down. But the crew, they were still his hostages. Cooper had new instructions: take off again, head south toward Mexico City, fly low, keep the speed slow, and don't try anything clever. The pilots followed orders, and somewhere over the dense forests of Washington state, in the middle of a rainstorm, D.B. Cooper did the unthinkable. He strapped on a parachute, tied the ransom money to himself, lowered the rear stairs of the 727, and jumped into the night. No chase cars, no helicopters, no GPS. Just a man and a bag of cash, vanishing into the storm. And here's the kicker: no one has ever seen him since. But once the smoke cleared and the plane was empty, one question hung heavier than the storm that night. Who exactly was D.B. Cooper, the hijacker? Here's the funny thing about D.B. Cooper. Nobody actually named him D.B. When the story first broke, reporters rushed to cover it. And somewhere in the mix, a simple typo transformed Dan Cooper, the name on the ticket, into D.B. Cooper. The mistake stuck like glue, and the legend was born. To this day, he's known by initials that were never really his. That little slip-up is kind of perfect, though, isn't it? Because this entire case is built on missteps, half-truths, and blanks that no one has ever been able to fill. The guy boarded a plane like any other passenger, hijacked it without firing a shot, and then disappeared as if he'd been swallowed by the clouds. No body, no confirmed landing spot, not even a single parachute left behind. Just a man-shaped question mark floating over the Pacific Northwest. From the beginning, the FBI dove into the case with all the force you'd expect. They interviewed witnesses, pulled fingerprints off the plane, and studied every word Cooper had spoken. He wasn't some sloppy, jittery criminal. He was calm, even charming. Flight attendants later described him as polite, offering them drinks, and even paying his tab before jumping out of the plane. Who does that? Because of his composure and his oddly specific demands, people started asking, was Cooper military, ex-Air Force, a paratrooper, maybe even a CIA guy who'd gone rogue? The FBI entertained all these possibilities, but none of them ever nailed down a name. Then came the suspects. Oh, the suspects. Over the decades, the FBI chased down more than 800 leads. They looked at petty criminals, skydiving hobbyists, Vietnam vets, and even one guy whose family swore on their Thanksgiving turkey that he was the real Cooper. The agency chased ghosts across the country and came up with nothing that stuck. In fact, after 45 years of dead ends, the FBI officially closed the case in 2016. That's right, the most famous unsolved hijacking in U.S. history is technically not even being investigated anymore. And here's where the story gets fun. Without the FBI in the chase, the public took over. Amateur sleuths, armchair detectives, Reddit threads, YouTube deep dives, you name it. Everyone had a theory, and some of them were downright wild. Was Cooper a disgruntled airline employee? A Canadian comic book fan, since Dan Cooper happens to be the name of a comic book hero popular in French-speaking Canada? Or maybe, just maybe, he didn't survive the jump at all, and the mystery is really just a man frozen somewhere in the Cascades. But here's the catch. Every theory says more about the people who believe it than about Cooper himself. Some want him to be a slick anti-hero who outsmarted the system. Others picture him as a tragic figure who gambled big and lost. Either way, he's become less of a man and more of a myth, an outlaw folk hero for the jet age. And that's exactly why, half a century later, we're still asking the same thing. Who was D.B. Cooper? Because if he wasn't just a faceless stranger with a parachute, then maybe, just maybe, someone out there has already figured out the truth. Inside the cockpit, and inside Cooper's head. Imagine you're one of the pilots on Flight 305. It's a regular gray November afternoon. You've got a short hop from Portland to Seattle, a cabin half full of holiday travelers, and you're already thinking about what's for dinner when you land. Then suddenly, a flight attendant slips into the cockpit, her face pale, and quietly says, "Seat 18C just handed me a note. He says he has a bomb." Yeah, not exactly the kind of message you want at cruising altitude. This is where the whole thing takes on a surreal, almost movie-like quality. Because the pilots weren't just sitting there thinking, "Oh, it's another passenger complaint." No, within minutes, they were negotiating directly with a hijacker who seemed to know exactly what to ask for. $200,000 in unmarked bills, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle. It wasn't just a random demand, it was like he had studied the playbook, and that's what makes Cooper fascinating. On the surface, his plan looked kind of brilliant. He picked Thanksgiving weekend, when airports were slammed and security was practically non-existent. Remember, this was before metal detectors became standard. He asked for an amount of money that banks could reasonably gather quickly. Not too much to stall, but enough to make headlines. And the parachutes? Genius move. By asking for 4, he planted the idea that maybe he'd take a hostage with him, which meant the FBI couldn't sabotage the gear without risking innocent lives. That's straight-up chess thinking. Now picture this from the pilot's view. They land in Seattle. The passengers are quietly let off, still believing it's just a mechanical delay. Meanwhile, on the tarmac, they're watching as money and parachutes are loaded on, and they're being told, "Get ready to fly this guy south toward Mexico City." Oh, and one more thing. He insists they keep the plane at 10,000 feet, flaps down, flying low and slow. Any pilot will tell you, that's not exactly smooth cruising, it's bumpy, noisy, and unnatural for a jetliner. And then comes the weirdest request of all. The rear staircase has to be lowered mid-flight. Now, unless you're really familiar with the Boeing 727, that's not something the average passenger would even think of. But Cooper knew it was possible. He had clearly done his homework, or at least knew someone who had. From the cockpit, the crew is sweating bullets. They don't know if this guy is military, a madman, or just lucky. All they know is that at some point, he's going to walk back there, open the stairs, and vanish into the night. Here's where the brilliant plan starts looking less perfect, though. Because while Cooper had the confidence of a man who believed he'd thought of everything, nature doesn't play by your rules. It was cold that night, around 30 degrees Fahrenheit, with rain and wind gusts whipping through the Pacific Northwest. He was wearing a suit and loafers, not exactly tactical gear. No helmet, no altimeter, no night vision. Just a parachute, a bag of cash, and nerves of steel. Think about that jump, 10,000 feet in the pitch black, over dense forest, not knowing exactly where you are because navigation wasn't GPS precise back then. You could land in trees, in a river, on rocks. Heck, you could get tangled midair and never even hit the ground alive. If this was Ocean's 11, it was the part of the movie where the heist crew suddenly realizes, oh, this might not go the way we planned. And yet, Cooper went through with it. The pilots felt the pressure drop when the stairs lowered, heard the rush of wind, and then nothing. By the time they landed, all that was left was an empty cabin, a missing hijacker, and the biggest question in aviation history. Here's the kicker, though. Looking back, was Cooper a criminal mastermind or just a desperate man gambling with his life? That's the debate. On one hand, he nailed the setup, the timing, the demands, the psychology. On the other hand, he jumped into some of the worst possible conditions with no survival equipment. That's either supreme confidence or supreme recklessness. Dan Gryder, being a pilot himself, loves breaking down this exact piece of the puzzle. To him, the details scream that Cooper wasn't just some lucky guy, he had aviation knowledge, maybe even military parachute training. The altitude, the plane choice, the stairs, all of it points to someone who had studied planes closely. But was that enough to keep him alive after the leap? That's where the debate gets juicy. Because the truth is, Cooper's plan might have been clever enough to get him off the plane, but whether it got him through the night is another story entirely. And that brings us back to the ultimate question. If the man in the suit survived that crazy jump, then who was he once he hit the ground? I found who DB Cooper really is. So here's where the DB Cooper rabbit hole takes its wildest turn. For decades, this case has been like a giant jigsaw puzzle where everyone swears they've got the missing piece. Then along comes Dan Gryder, a pilot, aviation instructor, and self-styled investigator saying, "Actually, I've solved it. I know who DB Cooper really was." Now, before you roll your eyes, here's the thing. Gryder isn't your average internet conspiracy theorist with a Reddit thread and a grainy photo. He's spent years digging into aviation accidents and mysteries, and he's built a following for exposing what he sees as overlooked truths in the aviation world. When he set his sights on DB Cooper, people perked up, not just because of what he said, but how he said it. In one of his most talked-about breakdowns, Gryder claimed flat out, "I found who DB Cooper really is, and it's not who you think." Bold, right? He laid out his case with a mix of aviation expertise and good old-fashioned detective energy. He pointed to details from the hijacking, Cooper's knowledge of the 727, his oddly specific demands, his calm demeanor under pressure, and connected them to someone he believes fits the profile perfectly. Here's the part that makes Gryder's take different. He doesn't just recycle the same old suspects we've been hearing about for years. Instead, he claims to have uncovered overlooked connections and inconsistencies in the FBI's original investigation. According to Gryder, Cooper wasn't some random drifter or career criminal. He was someone with a deep background in aviation, someone comfortable around planes and parachutes, someone who could confidently order a Boeing 727 to fly under conditions most pilots wouldn't even suggest. And unlike many armchair sleuths, Gryder backs his theories with documents, flight manuals, and interviews. He talks about Cooper's choice of parachutes, not just the fact that he asked for 4, but the specific type he accepted and why that choice mattered. He dives into how Cooper knew about the rear stairway of the 727, a feature that wasn't exactly common knowledge at the time. To Gryder, those details scream aviation insider. Of course, not everyone buys it. Critics argue that Gryder has a flair for showmanship, and his smoking gun doesn't always sound as airtight once you dig into the details. Some call him another name in a long line of people trying to make themselves the hero of the D.B. Cooper story. But here's the truth. Whether you agree with him or not, Gryder brought a fresh spark to a mystery that had started to feel like it would never move forward. And maybe that's why people latched onto his claim. After 50 years of cold leads and dead ends, hearing someone confidently say, "I know who it was," is irresistible. Even if you walk away skeptical, you're still talking about it, which is more than can be said for most of the FBI's official suspects. What Gryder really did, though, was remind everyone why D.B. Cooper still fascinates us. It's not just about whether he survived the jump, or where the money went, or even what his real name was. It's about the thrill of believing there is an answer, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right person to piece it all together. And Gryder isn't the only one who thinks he's got that answer. In fact, the hunt for Cooper's identity has turned into a whole subculture. Part detective work, part obsession, part campfire story. Because here's the thing, once you start looking for Cooper, you see him everywhere. Which brings us to the next twist. If Gryder really has solved it, what does that mean for the mystery? Does it finally close the case, or does it just open a new round of questions? The suspects and the wildest theories. If there's one thing the D.B. Cooper case never lacked, it was suspects. Over the years, more than 800 people were investigated, interrogated, or casually accused of being the man who jumped into legend. Some suspects seemed plausible. Others, well, let's just say they were more entertaining than realistic. Either way, each one added another layer to the myth. Let's start with the obvious ones, the men who actually looked and acted the part. One of the earliest suspects was Richard Floyd McCoy, a former Army Green Beret who, just months after the Cooper hijacking, pulled off an almost identical crime. He hijacked a plane, demanded $500,000, and parachuted out just like Cooper had. McCoy was caught, with the money still stuffed into a pillowcase no less, and sentenced to prison. Naturally, people wondered if he could have been Cooper all along, pulling off the ultimate repeat performance. But here's the problem. McCoy didn't match the physical description. Witnesses said Cooper was in his mid-40s. McCoy was in his 20s. Unless Cooper had a time machine, McCoy was more of a copycat than the real deal. Then there was Kenneth Christensen, a former paratrooper and Northwest Airlines employee. On paper, this guy looked promising. He had the aviation background, the parachuting skills, and even the right kind of quiet, reserved personality. His brother later claimed Kenneth confessed on his deathbed, saying something cryptic like, "There is something you should know, but I cannot tell you." Sounds spooky, right? But when investigators dug deeper, there wasn't much else to link him. No money, no hard evidence, just a lot of coincidences and a family eager to connect dots. Another favorite was Dwayne Weber. His wife claimed that before he died, Weber muttered, "I'm Dan Cooper." Naturally, that kind of deathbed drama was too good for reporters to ignore. His wife later said he had nightmares about leaving fingerprints on a plane, and he'd once injured his leg in a way that matched the possibility of a rough parachute landing. But again, the evidence didn't line up. It was like trying to complete a puzzle when half the pieces belonged to another box. And then there was William J. Smith, a World War II veteran who had a grudge against the airline industry. He ticked some boxes: age, height, military skills, but once again, it never quite fit. Like so many others, he became part of the folklore without ever being nailed down as the guy. Now, while some suspects felt at least possible, others were just plain wild. Over the years, conspiracy theories mushroomed like popcorn. Some people argued Cooper never survived the jump at all, pointing to the nasty storm, the dark night, and the dangerous terrain below. There's no way he could have lived through it, skeptics said, but that only raises a new question. Where's the body? If a man fell out of the sky with a parachute and a bag of cash, surely something would have turned up. Except some things did turn up. In 1980, a young boy camping on the banks of the Columbia River stumbled across 3 packets of cash buried in the sand. They were rotting, moldy, but still intact enough to trace. The serial numbers matched the ransom money given to Cooper. About $5,800 in 20s sitting in the dirt nearly a decade later. How it got there remains a mystery. Did Cooper bury it? Did it wash downstream? Or was it planted as some sort of breadcrumb trail? To this day, no one knows. That discovery gave rise to another popular theory. Maybe Cooper didn't survive, but the money did. Some investigators think the bills washed downriver after Cooper's bag ripped open mid-jump. Others believe it was proof Cooper survived long enough to hide some of the cash, maybe as a stash for later. Either way, the find only fueled more questions. And then, of course, you have the truly off-the-wall theories. Some insist Cooper was actually a woman in disguise. Others argue he was a CIA operative, testing out security vulnerabilities. There's even a corner of the internet convinced he was a time traveler or an alien, which sounds nuts until you realize this is the internet we're talking about. What all these theories prove, though, is that Cooper isn't just a mystery, he's a canvas. Everyone projects their own idea of who he was and what happened that night. To some, he's a criminal mastermind who outwitted the FBI. To others, he's a tragic figure who didn't live to spend a dime of his loot. And to a surprising number of people, he's a folk hero. Robin Hood in a necktie, sticking it to the man and vanishing before anyone could pin him down. While the FBI's official file eventually closed, the obsession didn't. If anything, it got stronger. Books, documentaries, podcasts, you name it. People have dissected every scrap of this case. And in recent years, one name has risen to the surface as someone who just might have cracked it wide open. And that's where Dan Gryder comes in when he named potential suspects. Was D.B. Cooper actually Richard Floyd McCoy? If there's one name that comes up over and over in the Cooper rabbit hole, it's Richard Floyd McCoy. Why? Because his own hijacking was practically the carbon copy of the Cooper playbook. So much so that people still argue to this day if he was, in fact, the same man who pulled off the most famous skyjacking in history. Let's rewind to April 7, 1972, barely 5 months after Cooper vanished. McCoy, a 29-year-old Vietnam veteran and skilled helicopter pilot, boarded a United Airlines flight from Denver to Los Angeles. He wasn't exactly blending in. Tall, with short hair, and sporting an army jacket, he had a pistol and a hand grenade tucked away. And just like Cooper, he passed a note to the flight attendant. He wanted money and parachutes. Sound familiar? But here's where things get almost too close for comfort. McCoy asked for $500,000, more than double Cooper's $200,000 haul, and he demanded 4 parachutes. Once the ransom was delivered during a refueling stop in San Francisco, McCoy ordered the plane back into the sky. He then bailed out somewhere over Utah, disappearing into the night. For a brief moment, It looked like Cooper 2.0 had just happened. Same hijack style, same parachute exit strategy, same daring mid-air escape. The difference? McCoy wasn't nearly as lucky. Authorities tracked him down just 2 days later thanks to a tip from a friend who recognized details of the crime. Police found the ransom cash and even his handwritten hijack note in his house. So much for vanishing into legend. McCoy was sentenced to 45 years in prison, but he didn't exactly stay put. In 1974, he and a group of inmates staged a wild escape from a federal penitentiary by hijacking a garbage truck and smashing through the gates. His freedom didn't last long. A standoff with the FBI ended with McCoy being shot and killed in Virginia. He was only 31. Now, here's where the conspiracy theories ignite. Some investigators, including an FBI agent who worked on both cases, argued McCoy was Cooper all along. They pointed to the uncanny similarities between the two hijackings, his military background, and his parachuting skills. On paper, it fit, but critics weren't convinced. For one thing, McCoy was only 29 at the time of Cooper's jump, and witnesses consistently described Cooper as being in his mid-40s. McCoy also looked different, shorter hair, thinner face, and not quite the chain-smoking, bourbon-sipping character the stewardesses remembered. Plus, the FBI was adamant. While McCoy was a copycat, he wasn't Cooper. Still, for many amateur sleuths, McCoy remains one of the strongest suspects. After all, if someone manages to hijack a plane, demand parachutes, and vanish into the night twice, isn't that at least worth raising an eyebrow? Maybe McCoy was a student who learned from Cooper, or maybe Cooper himself was McCoy perfecting his craft. Either way, the eerie similarities keep his name permanently stamped in the D.B. Cooper saga. And here's the thing, if McCoy really wasn't Cooper, then the world somehow produced two men crazy enough to leap out of airplanes with millions on the line, which might just make the mystery even weirder. Pop culture's Cooper obsession versus Gryder's hard facts. Here's the thing about D.B. Cooper. He's not just a hijacker anymore, he's a legend. Pop culture has polished him into this slick anti-hero, a guy in a sharp suit, sipping bourbon, coolly slipping on a parachute like James Bond before disappearing into the night. He's been the subject of songs, books, documentaries, and even cheeky references in shows like Loki. Cooper isn't remembered as a criminal, he's remembered as the guy who beat the system. But Dan Gryder's research throws cold water on that fantasy. According to him, the real Cooper wasn't some debonair sky pirate with movie star swagger. He was, well, kind of ordinary. A man with aviation knowledge, sure. A man with nerves, definitely. But glamorous? Charismatic? Not so much. Gryder paints a picture of someone practical, maybe even a little rough around the edges, who managed to pull off the jump, not because he was larger than life, but because he was willing to take a reckless chance. And honestly, that's where things get uncomfortable. We don't want D.B. Cooper to be ordinary. We want him to be the outlaw hero who stuck it to the man, pocketed the cash, and lived happily ever after on some tropical beach. The myth is exciting. The myth sells. The reality, that Cooper might have been a fairly unremarkable guy whose biggest moment was one daring stunt, isn't nearly as sexy. But maybe that's the point. Gryder's hard facts challenge us to separate the legend from the man. Because myths are fun, but history is messy. And the messy version is usually the truth. Cooper probably didn't land gracefully and stroll off with a grin. If he survived at all, it was cold, wet, and miserable. He wasn't a Bond villain or a Robin Hood. He was just a guy who hijacked a plane and got away with it, at least for a while. Still, maybe that's why the myth endures. We want to believe in the stylish rebel thumbing his nose at authority. It makes for a better story. Gryder's candidate, grounded in reality, might not give us that Hollywood sparkle. But if he's right, then the legend of D.B. Cooper may finally come down to earth. Ordinary man, extraordinary gamble. In the end, D.B. Cooper is still the riddle we can't stop chasing, whether he was a legend in a suit or just an ordinary man with guts? Stick around, hit subscribe, and join us as we keep digging into the mysteries the world still hasn't solved.